Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar on how to write a successful grant proposal by the National Institute of Statistical Sciences. So we have a fantastic set of 4 panelists for our session today. I'll start with a quick opening remark. I'm Dr. Shumanto Basu from Cornell University. Our first speaker will be Huixia Judy Wang. Dr. Wang is currently at the National Science Foundation. Our next speaker will be Dr. Stephen Kern from Gates Foundation, then Professor Joshua Tebbs from NIH and University of Southern California, and then Professor Ali Shojei from University of Washington. Each of the speakers will have 15 minutes to present, and then we'll have 25 minutes for floor discussion, where we'll take question and answer from the audience and panelists. So some details about the logistics. Linjiao Xue and Megan Glenn are also hosts for this session, so you could send your questions to them if there is any technical difficulty. For asking questions to the panelists, the webinar is set at view only for all the participants, and the attendees can use the question and answer or Q&A feature to ask questions. So to put in your question, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, type in your question for the speaker and click enter. So a few other details: when a speaker is sharing his or her screen, you can minimize the video display of the other speakers by clicking on the speaker view or the gallery view. You can find it on the top right of your Zoom window. After we conclude this session, you will receive an invitation from NISS to evaluate this session. This evaluation is very important to NISS, so please remember to provide your feedback. Link to the recording of the session and the links to the slides that the speakers presented, and they will also be available on the NISS website within a day or two. So let me stop sharing and introduce our first panelist. Professor Huixia Judy Wang is a program director of the statistics program under the Division of Mathematical Sciences at the National Science Foundation. And she is also a professor of statistics at George Washington University. She has taught previously at North Carolina State University and Columbia University as well. She is a fellow of the IMS and the ASA, and is the recipient of several prestigious awards, including the IMS Tweedy New Researchers Award. So Judy, the floor is all yours. Do you want to share your screen? Yes, we can all see your screen now. I'll mute myself.
All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for having me here. I want to first make a correction that I had my sabbatical at Columbia University in the Department of Statistics for a short time. I built collaborations through this visit, but I didn't actually teach there. So today I would like to share some tips for proposal writing, particularly for NSF proposals. I first want to make a disclaimer that many of those slides were presented by my colleagues as well, and including myself in the past. So I want to thank all my colleagues because part of the presentation credits should be given to them. So I'm serving as a rotating program director in the statistics program within the Division of Mathematical Sciences, which is one of the 5 divisions under the Directorate of Mathematical and Physical Sciences at NISS. And so as you'll see that within the division, besides statistics, there are about 10 other programs in other areas of mathematical sciences. So this is are my current colleagues in the statistical program, including myself, Yulia and Esther. We are rotators, and Gabor is a permanent program officer. Nadine is currently on leave. So before I share or some tips for proposal writing, just want to mention that statistical program supports many different types of research in statistics, including the development of theoretical methods, or those statistical proposals that are motivated by applications in any domain of science and engineering. And our regular programs, the deadline is coming up pretty soon in December, early December. So if you are planning to submit a proposal, it is the time to start writing. And we also support a career program, which is typically due in July. And besides the research proposals, the statistics program also provides support to conferences and workshops. Here, I want to share several resources for proposal writing. And including some links for career proposal writing workshops. To be honest, none of us knows the secret how to be successful with an NISS proposal writing. The proposals are evaluated by panels, and the panel change every year. But we do know one thing, and that is endorsed by all my colleagues. That is, the more you know about the process, and the more you use the knowledge, and this will increase the chance of success. And according to my colleague Edsel, and he provides another analogy that is writing grant proposal is similar to competing in the Olympics, which is true because nowadays it's very competitive in terms of proposal or grant applications. So even if you fail in the first time, it doesn't mean that there are like strong shortcomings in your research, but it just means that may be place for improvement in the proposal. All right, review process for NISS proposals, particularly in DMS. We run about 70 panels each year. And for each proposal, the policy is we have to have at least 3 reviews. And reviewers will evaluate and read the proposals in advance, and then they will provide detailed reviews. And then on the panel days, each proposal will be discussed in turn. And at the end, the entire panel will be asked to rank the proposal and place the proposal in different categories. So for instance, highly recommended category, recommended for funding if possible, and not recommended category. And the panel typically takes 2 to 3 days, and it's a very intense process. And the reviewers, they spend more than 8 hours a day, have very intense discussions of each proposal. And the panel serves as advisors to the program. So they make recommendations to the program. But after the panel, there are also many other factors the program will take into consideration, including information that is not public, not available to the panel. And then the program will incorporate all information that we have and make a recommendation to our leadership, whether to give out a award or decline the proposal. And there are 2 major review criteria for NISS grant applications, including intellectual merit and broader impact. So for both the criteria, for intellectual merit regarding research or advance to science and knowledge, and a broader impact for the potential of the project to benefit the society at large, the same elements typically are asked for when reviewers are reviewing those proposals. So it is very important to address what problem the proposal is focusing on and why you are working on those problems, and how to conduct the proposed research and activities, for instance, education, outreach, dissemination activities, and who are going to work on those. If the proposal involves more than one personnel, how the collaborators are going to work together, and what are their complementary expertise. So all of those will be evaluated, including the qualifications of PIs. Right. So here are some proposal preparation tips. Besides the statistics, I want to mention that at NSF, there are many other programs, including interdisciplinary programs that are relevant to statistics. So if you're not familiar with NSF, do not constrain yourself only to the statistical program, because there are good funding opportunities outside of this program. So first, you have to decide whether your proposal fits the program or not. You can visit the program's website and just find out the topics that are typically supported by the program. And besides those regular programs, there are also solicitations, which is the list proposals from the community in certain research areas. So you can also read those solicitations and see what are the focuses. And check the compliance. And the most helpful resource is PAPPG proposal preparation guideline. It lists all the details of how to prepare a proposal and what are the requirements. And when you write the proposal, it is helpful to keep in mind the audience of reviewers. And even though we try our best to recruit reviewers and assign reviewers with relevant expertise to each proposal, but those reviewers may not be exact expert in the specific research topic, even though they are all from relevant areas. So it is important to write to a broader group of audience and let both experts and non-experts understand what you are doing and appreciate the novelty of the proposed research. And make sure your research goals are clearly defined. If you have done something similar related in the past, make clear distinctions between your prior work and the proposed research. Sometimes this is very unclear to reviewers. Novelty is very important. So we typically do not fund research that just apply existing methods. So explain the novelty and emphasize it clearly in your proposal. Of course, make it readable, check grammatical errors, technical errors, etc. I would also suggest, especially for new PIs, junior researchers, seek advice from more senior colleagues who have more experience with proposal writing. Okay. So narrative, which is your project description that includes the proposed research, and educational activities, etc., broader impact related activities, provide a logical, easy to follow narrative. And as this is repeating, so clear distinction between your prior work and the proposed work. And if there are some preliminary results, oftentimes the panel appreciates that, but it's important to make it clear what are preliminary results that are already obtained and what are the research tasks to be accomplished once the project is funded. So yeah, do not wait for too long to draw reviewers' interest in that project. The first impression is very important. If your readers, your reviewers get lost in the first, say, 5 pages, it's going to be very difficult to receive positive feedback. Effective title and a project summary. Project summary is 1 page. It's like extended abstract. And those are also important because oftentimes after we recruit panelists, we send a list of proposals, including the title, to reviewers. Many of the reviewers only judge based on the titles and decide which proposals they feel strongly about reviewing and which proposal they do not feel comfortable reviewing. So coming up with an effective and informative title may decide who are going to review your proposal. So this is also equally important. Right, so while we don't know how to get funded, but we can share several tips about to avoid so that that may increase the chance of success. One is just to say that you are working on important problems, but do not give any details of what you are going to accomplish the goals. And of course, small font size, that is a killer as well. And also it's not in compliance. Some other tips or lessons, it's not describe the importance of the work. So why this is important and whether it is filling some gap in the literature. Not describing how the proposed work differs from existing approaches and distinct from what you have done in the past. And missing relevant and important literature. And sometimes the panelists complained that there is no discussion about potential difficulties or challenges and how the PI will overcome those challenges. Broader impacts is one of the two major review criteria at NISS. So if the proposal does not pay attention to broader impact, this will put the proposal at a very disadvantaged position. Some other ineffective strategies include shopping a proposal around from program to program. And one program director talk with each other, and every information is shared within NSF. So we can find out the history of our proposal if the proposal comes back without any revision. So there is a risk that proposal may be returned without review. Unfortunately, if your proposal is not recommended for funding in the first year, and you may reach out to program officers and try to understand better comments from reviewers and from the panel, but do not just submit our proposal without any revision at all, again, to the program. And it happened, even though not very often, but it happened sometimes the same proposal was submitted to multiple programs. And we can find out very easily. And in that case, the proposal that were submitted later may be returned without review. And also, it happened that a same PI submitted more than one proposal to the same program in the same year. So this oftentimes was also now viewed positively by the panel, even though that the proposals may be focusing on different areas. So very likely those proposals will be reviewed by the same panel. So if you plan to do that, please, I would advise you check and talk with the program directors in that program and explain your plan. For proposals in response to solicitations, it's very important to read the solicitation very carefully, because those solicitations may have specific requirements in terms of documents, page limit, and some other solicitation-specific review criteria. And in some programs, non-compliance to those specific requirements may result in proposals being returned without review. And from the solicitation, you can also understand the goals of the program and evaluate whether your proposed research would fit the scope of the program. When the solicitation mentions should, that means must. So there could be very serious consequence if the proposal does not follow such guidelines. And final remarks, seek help, seek advice from past awardees, your mentors or colleagues and friends. And you may even ask someone not in your field to proofread your proposal, just to see whether the flow is coherent and whether the writing is clear to demonstrate the significance, the importance of the problem and novelty of the proposed methods. If you want to know what kind of projects that have been funded by a specific program, a good way is to go to NSF website and look at those abstracts of past projects that were funded by that program. Of course, if you haven't served as a panelist yet, you will benefit from this experience. So volunteer as a reviewer so that you'll know the review process better. You may either email the program directors in the program, relevant program you're interested, or fill out the form if you would like to volunteer to serve as a panelist for DMS programs. And if you haven't done so, please also consider subscribe to DMS listserv, and you will receive email notifications when there are new funding opportunities, new programs, and also when there are DMS events. We are always happy to talk. If you have any questions, you may reach out to us in the statistical program, or sometimes, for instance, at joint statistical meetings, we also host different events, including virtual exhibit in the past 2 years since the JSM was virtual. So you can also schedule to have a one-on-one meeting with one of the program directors. And since the pandemic, DMS has been hosting monthly virtual office hours. And for each office hour, colleagues will introduce the programs that have forthcoming deadlines. So the next virtual office hour is coming up on November 18th. And the statistical program will introduce our program and answer questions from participants. And I also include the link to presentation slides from past DMS virtual office hours. And one of the virtual office hours includes some tips for new PIs. You may find this helpful when preparing your first proposal. And there are some other resources. I want to mention ASA has a committee on funded research. And if you haven't visited their homepage, I would strongly encourage you to do so. There is a very rich resource from the website, including presentations from webinars in the past regarding funding opportunities, regarding proposal writing for different programs, etc. All right, so once again, just want to thank my colleagues who have contributed to the slide deck. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy, for the very informative presentation. I think we are running a little late in time, so there are a few questions in the chat box. If you think some of them can be answered through chat, please feel free to answer. Otherwise, we'll come back during the floor discussion.
Yeah, we can come back, and if I can answer, I'll type the responses in the Q&A.
Thanks. All right, so let's move on to our next presentation. So our next panelist is Dr. Stephen Kearns. Stephen Kern is the Deputy Director of Quantitative Sciences at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Before joining the Gates Foundation, Dr. Kern worked as the Global Head of Pharmacology at Novartis Pharma, and also previously as an Associate Professor at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Dr. Kern has designed, conducted, and served as a principal investigator for several clinical pharmacology studies throughout his career. So, Dr. Kern, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Svantu, and glad to be here. So I'm going to speak on behalf of funding at the Gates Foundation, but I'd like to say that a lot of the comments I'll make are general to many private foundations for whom you might seek funding from. Right, so while I'll specifically talk to issues that are pertinent to our organization, you can generalize a number of these, and I'll try to point those out. So I'll just briefly talk to you a little bit about our foundation. I'll give you some examples of some very statistically heavy investments that we've made that just give you some context, and then kind of wrap up with some opportunities. So let's get that going. Okay, So just something about us. So, we consider ourselves or call ourselves impatient optimists. We're working to reduce inequity around the world. We do a big focus in the United States on U.S. education programs and trying to help all people essentially have access to a high quality education. We have focus, and focus is the key word, on areas of greatest need. That's greatest need as we determine it oftentimes with our advisors and the places that we work. And so our greatest needs might not necessarily be aligned with your greatest needs. So it's important to make sure that the things that we're aligned and interested in funding are aligned with what you're interested in also working on. And important for us, we view ourselves as fairly risky investors. We tend to make grants on ideas that, if they worked, would actually have tremendous potential impact, but oftentimes are at high risk for not working. So we tend to fund things that oftentimes wouldn't be of interest to other funders for whom you might look for funding. So importantly, for any private foundation that you're going to work with or want to consider partnering with, really understand what we do, because in saying what we do, it also defines what we don't do. So we will fund investments and make grants and contracts in these different areas that are listed here, and specifically focused on those areas. So to the points that Judy made about really reading and understanding and gathering information about your funder, that's really going to be key with any private foundation that you're going to work with. The challenge that private foundations try to look for is, where can their capital be most impactful? So where can my investments complement those of NIH, those of NSF, those of other foundations, rather than duplicate, so that we can actually have tremendous impact together, rather than thinking about things that I'm going to invest in that might be the same as one of the other program officers. And particularly how we do that is really important. So we like to believe that the grantees and partners are really at the center of our work. So we're enablers. We don't do the work ourselves, but we're intricately involved with it. And you'll hear that I'm using words like investment because that's actually one of the ways that we view the work that we do. We use grants, we do contracts, but we do view them as investments. And we do use the word partner a lot because we like to be intellectually and strategically engaged with the people that we're working with. So we're really big on this idea of taking risks and pushing for new solutions. Have a strong bent on science and technology contributing to solutions, but not believing necessarily that they're the answer to everything. And it requires the support of governments, private sector, communities, nonprofits, individuals. So very collaborative in the sense of the projects we work on. The bigger projects that we tend to fund are generally extremely complicated, involve multiple agencies, might have multiple funders as well. But I think they're important to consider where roles of the statistical society and statisticians can actually be really key and instrumental in that. So we make essentially three different types of what we call investments. So grants, which are, as you would assume, you apply for a grant and they're awarded, the funding is for a specific project and it moves forward. We also do what are called direct charitable expenses. So those are contracts. On my team, I have half a dozen people that work with me internally, and then we probably have another 24 statisticians and quantitative scientists who work on projects with us as contractors. So we have specific tasks and things that we need done. We need partnership to learn, some analysis to do. We'll actually contract with people to work with us on a regular basis. So that's another entity of how we look to get our work accomplished. We also do what are called programmatic related investments, where we'll fund investments or give loans or guarantees or actually make even equity investments in small startup companies. And we've done that in the past as well. If it aligns with the mission of what we're trying to achieve, and it actually helps, particularly on some of the riskier endeavors. So, one of the things I wanted to just give you as a highlight, taking risks using grants, and we're oftentimes operating in this model where we're capitalizing on unexpected outcomes. So this data here is a table that the most thing I want to show to you is the TANA study that was published in JAMA, so Journal of American Medical Association in 2009, by Travis Porco as the lead author. Travis Porco is a biostatistician at UCSF. And one of the consequent findings that they had in this study, they were looking to use the antibiotic azithromycin for treating trachoma, commonly used, done in mass drug administration campaigns. They noticed a signal in their data after the end of their study that there seemed to be a mortality difference in the children that received azithromycin compared to the children that didn't. And that got their curiosity going. So they approached us to say, could we study this in more detail as a prospective analysis? And so one of the things that, that Travis actually was really intent on doing was looking at how do I appropriately power this study? How do I think about the factors that actually could contribute to us being able to see this effect if it was indeed true, as opposed to just a serendipitous result. And so, we conducted then a study going forward, interestingly called the Mordor trial. It was because the principal investigator has a fascination with Lord of the Rings, and so he wanted to put that name in. So he used a French acronym that became Mordor. Again, these are the things that you get some latitude with as a grantee. Conducted in 3 countries, Niger, Tanzania, and Malawi in Africa as a follow-up. And notice a couple things that are interesting. 3 different groups. The studies are run by 3 different organizations on the ground in partnership, in this case with different US or British academic institutions who work in collaboration with people on the ground in those locations. And really importantly, spent a bunch of time on study design. So for us, we pay a lot of attention to study design, structural details about how the study is actually going to be executed, because we don't want to fund something that has a low probability of actually assessing or measuring the impact of the investment. One of the things that's okay is if the idea of the concept doesn't work, that's fine. We'd like to be able to answer that question in partnership with our grantees with some degree of certainty. So here, just an example of this is a randomization. It was a community randomized study where actually we had to do some assessments for how many communities would be appropriate to be able to see this effect. And the way they did that was by clinical trial simulation. So it did massive numbers of clinical trial simulations, tried to look at the probability that we would see an effect given the assumptions that we know. And all of this work was done in advance of creating the study and actually rolling out and doing the work, right? This was all in preparation for it. And it was done in a very cooperative and iterative way. So unlike the typical grant proposal where you're responding to an RFP by a date or a deadline, this was a co-opted project that worked between the program officer and the grantees to actually develop and co-create, if you will, a study to assess this question with some degree of certainty. Just quickly, I'll show you the results. It actually showed a replication overall in the study results, interestingly driven by the places with the highest amount of poverty. So in Niger, you can see across different age groups here in the center graph, there was actually a decreased mortality with the azithromycin. In the other 2 countries, there was only decreased mortality in the youngest kids, not in the kids as they got older. Okay, so again, some interesting context that gives us insight to say, okay, how might we take this result and now apply it into a strategy? So if I am the Minister of Health in Niger, how might I interpret these results differently, say, than if I'm the Minister of Health in a place like Malawi? So important that we're really trying to use that power that statisticians and statistical analysis can bring to the data to make sure that we can answer questions with a high degree of certainty. Because ultimately, a nice publication in New England Journal of Medicine is great, but our goal is actually to change policy to impact and save lives, and that's how the metrics that we use to measure grant success go forward. I'll just mention another grant that I happen to be involved with that's run out of the University of Pennsylvania called ClinEpiDB. And I just point this out because it's a database. Basically, it's a repository that holds the data, individual subject level data from studies we funded. And we built this repository on top of a 20-year investment by our colleagues at the NIH at the University of Pennsylvania to build data repositories for keeping track of pathogen genomic sequences and a lot of data related to pathogen genomic. And so then we started to put clinical trials that might actually link into those pathogens into the same platform with the idea that we could link them. I just bring that up because as you think about how would you approach a grant proposal to an organization like ours, we're starting to make the data available as the NIH does, as NSF does, from their previous grants so that you can learn from those and use those as a way to inform the kinds of applications you might have going forward. The other last part I'll talk about is what we call the Grand Challenges. So Grand Challenges is a collaboration of a number of different funders that work together to solve problems throughout the world. It started in 2005. Here's a website, and again, you can have this in the slides that will be posted afterwards. where you could go look for information about this. This is one of the few programs that we do where we do it under RFPs. So generally, a lot of our grants are what we call directed funding, where we learn about your capabilities and reach out and work in partnership, as I mentioned in that first study, looking at azithromycin. So grand challenges will usually have a specific question that's defined with an opportunity. There's dates that are opening and closing. Notice those dates of open and close are pretty tight. So they're generally short duration application processes and not necessarily long duration awards. They start off with seed funding that's usually a year, somewhere in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. But if the results are good, then the idea is that they would transition into a second award, which could be bigger and longer in size. But as Judy was mentioning, really important to read the grant proposal perspective, because here you see a number of components that are key. So in the upper left corner, it identifies what's the challenge or the problem we're trying to address. Interestingly, then in the middle, successful proposals should consider the following. So here's some clues on things that we would want to be included in a successful proposal. And then here in the top right side, things that will be considered for funding, and then things in the bottom right side, things that would not be considered for funding. So very explicit instructions about the kinds of areas that we're trying to invest in as a funder to help move our objectives and our strategies forward, because we're really focused on our strategies more so than general components. So, one of the things I think in taking risks on private philanthropy to keep in mind is that philanthropy organizations are focused on their strategy. So you need to align with that focus and need to understand how your skills and your experience and your interests actually can also align with those of the funder so that you can do great things together. They don't always fund ideas versus, via requests for proposals or RFPs. As I mentioned, we do direct funding, collaborative grants, sometimes consortium program. So it's important to actually be engaged with program officers to understand what it is that they're looking for and how your experience or your interests might fit in with those. To do that, it's important to stay connected in their channels to find out what's in scope. The Grand Challenge website is a great place. As I said, there's probably a dozen to 24 funders that actually are offering projects through Grand Challenges, not just the Gates Foundation. We have shorter time for submission, so you have to be prepared. We also have shorter applications actually as well too. So things are a little bit different in terms of scale. And partner investments are purposely chosen words for us, right? We really view that grantees are our partners that we're working with intellectually to essentially co-create and move the investment forward. And we look at it as an investment. We want to have a return on that investment of helping us advance our strategies and move things forward to serve the people that we're trying to serve. And so remember too, it's not always grants, there's also opportunities for contracts and other things. So I'll just echo Judy's comments about good grantsmanship that are critical, but a real important thing I think with private foundations is having a dialogue with someone in the foundation to understand, for one, to understand your strengths and your ability to contribute, and two, for you to understand their needs and where those two could align. And we've had great success working with the statistical community because they're a key component to making sure that we're making data-informed decisions in our investments, which we'll hope to do in the future. So I'll stop there and turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Stephen. That was a very informative presentation. In the interest of time, we will move on to the next presentation. There are a couple of questions for you in the chat box, Stephen. If you think they could be answered by typing, feel free to answer them. Otherwise, we'll come back during the floor discussion. So Joshua, do you want to start sharing your screen as I introduce you? So our next speaker is Professor Joshua Tebbs. He is a professor and the current chair in the Department of Statistics at University of South Carolina. His research interests are broadly in the development of statistical methods for categorical data, as well as in general biostatistical methods under ordering or shape restrictions. He is an elected member of the International Statistical Institute, a fellow of the ASA, and his research program is funded by the NIH. He's currently editor-in-chief at American Statistician, associate editor at Statistics in Medicine, and a former member of the Biostatistical Methods and Research Design, or BMRD study section in the NIH. Josh, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Basu. Thanks everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about how to write a successful grant application. Just as a disclaimer, I do not work for NIH. I'm just a former member, a permanent member of the Biostatistical Methods in Research Design study section. I've also reviewed for a handful of other panels, study sections, other types of study sections. And so I completed a 4-year term. I was a temporary member before that, and then I accepted an appointment as a 4-year permanent member. So BMRD meets 3 times a year. So at about 10 proposals per panel, that means I read about 30 proposals per year. And not only read them, but was prepared to present them to the rest of the panel. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works. So nothing that I'm saying today should be interpreted as NIH policy. This is really just kind of a rehashing, if you will, of my experience as a BMRD member. And along with my own experience in grantsmanship, I've cobbled together some tips and pointers that hopefully you find to be very useful. So so just some NIH grant basics. And so the NIH grants are reviewed by the Center for Scientific Review. So most grants are scored in a study section, such as BMRD. But the study sections don't make funding decisions. The purpose of the panel, like BMRD or other panels, is to only assess the scientific merit of the application. After that, our job is done. Funding decisions are actually made by institutes at the national, or an institute at NIH. So reviewers do not make funding decisions. In fact, there's an inside joke at BMRD that we never say the F word for funding. And each institute has its own pay line. And so the idea is the lower the score, the better. And so scores that come in below the pay line have a very, very good chance of being funded. Scores that come in above the pay line still have a chance to be funded. And so, you know, if a pay line is 16 and you get a 21, it's worth some effort on your part to reach out to the program officer and talk to him or her about the possibility of the proposal still being funded. And so if you are, I would suspect that most of the attendees at this webinar are new investigators or would be best regarded as such. Make sure that you identify yourself as a new investigator in the application because you have more generous funding pay lines than say a seasoned principal investigator. So make sure that you note that. And like Judy said, and like Stephen said, there are great websites that are available. You know, when I write my NIH grants, I'm constantly looking at websites on NIH websites, sample applications, directions, and whatnot. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But above all, talk to your program officer too. You know, so like Judy said, that where I think a great thing that NSF does is they have virtual office hours. Of course, I don't work for NIH, but the availability of program officers, they are for you. And so, you know, so if you're doing cancer research, you know, reach out to program officers at NCI. You know, my work is funded by NIAID, and so I know a lot of the program officers there. So, you know, talk to program officers about your research. NIH is a little different than NSF. And so the 5 main criteria, whereas NSF is intellectual merit and broader impacts, the review criteria for NIH are significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. Okay, and so there are definitions and key questions that reviewers ask when your application is evaluated on the basis of each of these criterion. Excuse me, and reviewers are are asked to document the strengths and weaknesses in each area. So just kind of, off the top of my head, significance is the problem important? Does this address an important problem in science or public health? Investigators, what's the quality of the investigators? How balanced is the investigative team? And here it's important. So for example, if you're talking about new statistical methods for Alzheimer's, and it's very important for your investigative team to have someone that specializes at least in neurological conditions. Innovation, how innovative is the work? Now, innovation can mean two different things. Is your work statistically innovative? That is, are you pushing the boundaries of biostatistical science? But your work could also be mildly statistically innovative, but have high impact in a translational area. So for example, some of the areas that maybe Steve talked about, where you could have tremendous public health impact on clean drinking water in Africa or whatnot. There could be a tremendous innovation in the science, and the statistical methods are maybe only mildly innovative, but are the right tools to use for the problem to be investigated. The approach is really kind of the guts of the proposal that we might consider to be kind of the nuts and bolts, where you lay out the methodology and you talk about preliminary data that you've collected and make an assessment about how you're going to evaluate the methods in terms of how robust they are and do they provide unbiased solutions. The environment is also one of the 5 criteria. It's not just how good of a school you're at. It is what type of an environment is created in working with investigators, and does your institution foster collaboration and foster an environment which will contribute to the success of the proposal. So those are the main 5, and I'll give you some examples of some generic scores that might be assigned in each of those 5 sections here in a moment. But don't forget, there are additional review criteria, some of which are score driving and some of which are not. For example, human subjects. Most applications that we get involve humans in some way. And so you want to be very, very careful about spending a lot of time on the human subjects aspect of your research. On my latest R01 renewal, me and my colleagues, we spent a month working on the human subjects aspect of the research. And so it's not something that you want to just throw together at the end and claim a typical exemption, but really spend a lot of time talking about it. Foreign organizations, are there colleagues from other countries? Biohazards, there's lots of these additional review criteria. And as a reviewer, I've sat on about 20 NIH panels in my career, and each time I have to go through a pretty rigorous training session where we have to review, we review the protocols on how everything is scored and how everything works. And so, okay. So, in each of the 5 criterion areas that I talked about a moment ago, each of those is scored 1 to 9. So if I'm reviewing your proposal, I might review your proposal to have a significance of 7, an innovation of 2, investigators 2, innovation of 5, approach of 3, and an environment of 2. This would be an example of an application that might be very, very strong proposal in terms of proposing new biostatistical methodology, the things that we would like to see in JASA and biometrics and whatnot. But it might be in a translational area that's just not that high impact. And so at the end of the day, how is this going to change public health? How is this going to improve public health? How is this just going to improve the public health of citizens of the United States? Whereas in the second example, you'll see significance of 1, innovation, investigators 2, innovation of 4, approach 6, environment of 1. This might be an application that addresses a very, very important public health problem, but maybe lags a little behind in the approach. Maybe the details of the approach weren't spelled out clearly. Maybe authors didn't address how robust their solutions might be in the presence of model misspecification, for example. So there are some potential problems with the approach. And the key to NIH is to strike a balance between innovative research in terms of biostatistics or statistics more generally, the types of things that we might publish in JASA or Annals or Biometrica or Biometrics or Biostatistics, but also have that that translational impact as well. And so that's the kind of NIH, at least at BMRD, and I only speak for BMRD, or at least I only speak for me and my experience on BMRD, but I can say with pretty high degree of confidence that BMRD typically look for those applications that hit both of those angles. And so we talk about this a lot. What's the trade-off? What's the trade-off between funding proposals that are maybe only modestly statistically innovative, but really have the potential to have high impact in changing public health or improving public health or changing the direction of a field. And so we talk about that balance a lot. So, okay, so just kind of a little bit on how the panel works. And so each reviewer will read about 8 to 10 proposals, and he or she'll discuss those aspects with the panel. Each proposal, so if you submit a proposal to NIH, it will be assigned usually by 3 reviewers. Sometimes there's more if there are mail-in reviewers. And those 3 reviewers that receive your proposal are really 3 very important people to you. Of course, you don't know who they are, but the primary person leads the discussions for the panel. The secondary and tertiary reviewers, they add remarks. And then they come up with an overall impact score. So before the presentation begins, if I'm the first reviewer, I've got an overall impact score, which you can think of that as, loosely speaking, some type of a weighted average of the criteria scores. Okay, it could be an average, it could be a weighted average. And so the three reviewers talk about the proposal, talk about the strengths and applications. A panel discussion then ensues. The chair summarizes the discussion. The reviewers will then revisit their overall impact scores with the ability to change it, either get better or worse on the basis of what the panel discussed. And then after that, after each of the reviewers gives the overall final impact score, then every member on the panel, regardless of whether they have read your application, actually gives a score. And so I might score a proposal that I've never read before. During the meeting, I might try to get the gist of the proposal, but I'm actually scoring a proposal that I have not read from cover to cover. That's why it's very important for those 3 reviewers to have a very good impression, a very good picture of your proposal so that they can adequately explain that to the rest of the panel members. And you have to keep in mind that at every panel, which sometimes takes 2 or 3 days, we will talk about 40 to 50 applications. So, and unlike NSF, which actually reads and scores every proposal, NIH implements a triage system where only the top half are discussed. And so, okay, so it's a very, each panel is a lot of work. It's very, very tiring and exhausting. And so just some general advice that, that I've accrued in my time as a BMRD reviewer, but also in writing my own grants, is that, first of all, you can't expect that, and Judy mentioned this as well, excuse me, that you can't expect that your reviewers will be experts in your application area or your area of statistics research. And so I'm not an expert in every application area and every statistical area. But that doesn't mean that I can't follow the protocol that NIH lays out on how to be a good reviewer. So you want to adopt a writing style that's very warm and inviting. And Judy made the remark that with NSF that, after about page 5, if the reviewers are lost, that's kind of bad news. So, because NIH is more application oriented, if the reviewer doesn't have a very good idea in his or her mind what the significance and innovation of your proposal is after reading those sections, you're fighting an uphill battle. So it's very, very important to state why this is important and demonstrate real world impact right from the get-go. Okay, so NIH isn't interested if you find new unbiased estimators or, talk about new, Lindenberg central limit theory. They don't really care about that. They are more interested in how is this going to improve public health in the United States. So you want to make it very easy for reviewers to grasp the main ideas, be very clear and concise, and try to do a very, very good job, at least in highlighting the biostatistical innovation of what makes your work different than that's in the literature. You will always have that reviewer that spends his or her time trying to flag down research in the literature that is nearly the same or the same as yours. And so you want to do a very, very good job at highlighting what the difference is between what's been proposed in the past and what your work is and how it's different. So a big part of any NIH application is significance and innovation. The approach, what we might regard to be the meat of a biostatistics paper, that actually oftentimes becomes a little ancillary. If the reviewers are very excited about how significant and innovative your work is, then the approach becomes less important. I'm not going to say it's not important, but it certainly becomes less important. In other words, it's certainly possible for a proposal to not have terribly innovative statistical research, but if it addresses an important problem in public health or medicine, it's much more likely to be funded than a proposal that has wonderful biostatistics research, but is likely going to have low impact in an application area. So just finally, these are my final suggestions, just from a grant writer myself and reviewing many grants over the last 5 or 6 years. I'd say give yourself 6 months from start to finish to, once you start coming up with initial ideas. Obviously, it depends on what funding mechanism you use within NIH. R01s are the large grants, R21s and R03s are more smaller grants. Details are the mark of the master. And so this is a general expression that I use a lot, but in grant writing, it matters because writing a grant takes a lot of work. It takes, there are many different hurdles, make big checklists and check them off. There are lots of things that go into writing a grant, not only writing the exposition itself, but doing budgets and recruiting investigative teams and writing bio sketches and addressing all the issues that go into a grant. Give yourself time to do it. It's very easy as a reviewer to spot applications that have been put together. You can tell within the last few weeks. It shows, and they are rarely successful. And have others read your application, especially if you're a new investigator. Have your mentor or senior colleague read, particularly those that have been funded by NIH before, and revise. Rip your grant apart, put it back together. So when you get your reviews back, you'll have to make a decision about if you want to revise. I'm sort of operating under the assumption that it's not going to get funded because remember, very few grants get funded the first time. 2 of my 3 R01s were funded not on the first time, on the revision. And so you'll just want to expect that. So, your goal in your first submission is to get scored, i.e. you're in the top half of the proposals and then try to address the revision, try to address the comments in a revision. So, and regardless of whether your grant gets funded, you're still, think about writing the grant itself. I mean, you're laying out, you're prioritizing your research goals for the next few years. That in and of itself is incredibly useful because regardless of whether the grant gets funded, I mean, you can still do the research. And a lot of times when particularly young investigators that are in the beginning of their research career, writing a grant is a great way to prioritize the next couple of years of your research life. And so I always tell people, well, regardless of whether it gets funded, you still get to do the research. And in writing a grant, it's a great way to actually help you organize your thoughts and prioritize what your next few years should be. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joshua, for a great presentation. We are running a little late in time, so we're going to move to the next presentation. I believe there is one question for you in the chat box. If you want, you could answer them by typing, or we could come back during the floor discussion. Ali, do you want to start sharing your screen as I introduce you?
Can't yet, but maybe after Joshua unshares, I could share my screen.
All right, so our fourth and final speaker of this session is Professor Ali Shajei. Professor Shajei is a professor and the associate chair of biostatistics and also adjunct professor of statistics and the founding director of the Summer Institute of Statistics and Big Data at the University of Washington. He was originally trained in industrial and systems engineering, and he obtained his PhD in statistics from the University of Michigan, while also completing master's degrees in applied mathematics and human genetics. Professor Shajei's research lies in the intersection of statistical machine learning, statistical network analysis, and applications in biology and social sciences. And he has been successful in securing many grants from NSF and NIH, both as a sole PI and also as part of collaborative teams. So Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shamanta. Thank you for having me being part of this panel. And I was chatting with colleagues in this panel that sort of, I think it's humbling to go after all the things that have been said, partly because I really do think that, and this was mentioned, the whole grant writing and funding process is somewhat a random process, that no matter how hard you try, there's going to be some unknowns and some stochasticity involved in it. So I've been successful a couple times over the past couple of years, but I was unsuccessful many times before that, and I'm still sort of unsuccessful now as sort of we get applications in, and sort of not all of them get funded. I mean, so Joshua mentioned this, that I think maybe once or twice over the past 10 years I've gotten a grant funded on the first try, and all the others have been sort of second try at best, and some don't get funded. So I'm gonna. I've also served on some study sections both at NIH and NSF. I'll briefly mention my experience at study sections, but I'll focus mostly on the other side of it, on writing grants, at least from my own limited experience, and what has worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. And what I'm going to do is to divide my comments and thoughts into three categories: things to do before writing a grant, things to do once you're ready to write a grant and sort of during the writing process, and then things that are more general or do after writing the grant. So these are color coded a little bit, and I only have one slide. So hopefully we'll get back on time a little bit. So before writing the grant, one of the most important things is to find what's relevant for your research and what is a good fit. So we heard about grants at NSF, at NIH, at the Gates Foundation, which is an example of all the other potentially private foundations as well. There are many funding opportunities out there, and funding agencies out there, and programs out there. So NIH, for example, has generic research programs, but also has requests for application. That these are very specific programs that say that, okay, we want to address this particular public health problem. We're looking for applications that are focused on this area. So you could submit your application if it's a good fit to that particular program, or you could send your application to the more general programs. These are and investigator-initiated applications at NIH. So you need to do quite a bit of research to figure out what is the right fit for you. And within NIH, there are R01s, R21s, R03s. There's Ks for junior investigators. There's a whole host of applications, and then there's Ps and Us and everything else. And then within NSF, you have the DMS program. Judy mentioned that there are other programs that I think there's some really good gems out there in among the things that DMS funds outside of the statistics program, and they're not as popular among statisticians as they should be, I think. But there's within the statistics program, there's the statistics program, the usual statistics program, there's the career program, but there are many others that DMS supports, and you could apply to those as well, and they're open to statistics applications. So spend time trying to figure out what is the right program for your research. And this relates to my next comment. At the beginning, I struggled with this a lot. When I first started my career, I was trying to sort of send applications and sort of get funding and get things going. And I think what I was doing was that I was a little bit forcing it. I was trying to force my research into whatever application that was out there and trying to connect them together. One of the really important things that reviewers look for, both at NSF and NIH, and I think it's really important, is to have a coherent proposal. Have pieces of the proposal that mesh together well, that they're part of a bigger research program that you want to present. So what I have been doing over the past 6-7 years has been to sort of turn it a little bit around. I do my research, I focus on my own research, and Joshua mentioned this, that sort of anytime that I write a proposal, I see it as an opportunity to think about sort of what I want to do, what research I want to do, and plan for my own research. It's one of the few times that I could sit down and sort of be completely open to what I want to do next. Obviously, this is a lot of times driven by what you've done, what the research that you've done, but I don't try to sort of fit my research into programs. I try to find programs that fit my research. So again, this is the way it's worked for me. It works differently for different people, but I try to see when my research projects get to the point that I have enough confidence in them that I think they're interesting. And then I could collect a bunch of related research projects that say, okay, these form a theme. I could build an application around these. In a sense, I'm being opportunistic because I'm doing my research and I continue doing my research while I think about sort of what are the potential programs that might be good programs that I could now present my research into in a form of a proposal to these programs. Now, part of this, I think someone asked this as a chat question, is that what I've experienced is actually having preliminary data is very helpful in supporting your research. This is really important for NIH, especially for R01 applications. For R21s, it's not as important. But even for NSF, I think it's really important to convince reviewers that what you're doing is not only just doable, because you're showing that it's doable, but also potentially exciting, because you're showing that it could do much better than sort of what is out there. So doing a little bit of research, usually for me, and I know that this is not going to be consistent across the board, but the optimal time for me to write a proposal is when I've done something about sort of 30 to 50% of the research for that project or for those projects. And sort of I've done some initial research on it. It's not like I just have an idea. Usually the ones that work better and sort of I've been more successful with them are research projects that sort of I have actually done a little bit of research on them. It's not just some thought that sort of this could be interesting. I've had that thought, I've developed it a little bit, and maybe working with my students, etc. We've also done some preliminary look at it to see how it might look, what it might do, and how it might compare to some of the other methods. That's the optimal time, and that's why I was saying that sort of I try to be opportunistic. That's sort of for me the optimal time for writing a proposal, and I'm always thinking that sort of once I get to around that time of between 30, 25 to 50% of having done the research for the work, then I think about sort of what are the related pieces that I could put together, make an application out of it. So I keep doing my research, and that way my research is not on hold, or that it's not suffering if I do get or I don't get the award. I keep doing my research, and as the opportunity comes up, I look at the programs and I submit my application to these programs. And the other reason that this approach potentially is helpful is that one of the really important aspects of writing a successful grant is to back up what you're proposing by having a track record in that area. Again, this was already mentioned, but it's really important to position your application and your proposed research in the context of existing research. One of the big reasons that grants don't get funded is if you miss a bunch of papers that have been published in that area. That's quickly sort of reviewers will point it out, and sort of that application a lot of times is not going to get funded. So you need to know that area really well. You need to position your work within that area really well, and convince the reviewers how your work would advance the research in that area. So all of this basically means that if you do good research, if you establish yourself as a leader in that area of research, then it's much easier to apply for funding and be successful in applications. The third thing that I want to mention as preparation for your application is to know your audience. That there are significant differences, despite all the similarities, between the review processes at NSF and NIH, for example. And you want to know who your potential reviewers are. If you're writing to the usual statistics program at NSF, so one thing that is different actually is that you could see who are people who have served on panels at NIH, but you don't have that information for NSF. However, you could see what applications were funded previously by that program. So you could go and look at what are the applications that have been funded by NSF, and you get a sense of what that panel is looking for, even though the panel is changing from year to year, the makeup of the panel. But in general, the members of the panel are chosen because they're suitable for the types of applications that program is interested in. So you get a indirect sense of who are the reviewers that you should be writing to. For NIH is much more specific. You actually get to see who are the panelists from last year. So you get to see what the makeup of the panel is. The BMRD session is the only session that is made mostly up by statisticians and statisticians. All the other NIH panels that I've participated in, and now I'm currently participating in what is known as the member conflict panel, which is a weird panel that reviews panels from sitting members in other study sections. And all the NIH panels and study sections might have one or two statistician or biostatistician in them, but the majority of them are people from other fields. They're epidemiologists, they're physicians sometimes, they're bioinformaticians, they're computer scientists, the relevant ones for our field. So you need to think about how you write your proposal and who based on who your audience is, and how to write your proposal in a way that appeals to that panel, to that study section. I'll put a disclaimer that you don't necessarily have full control over this. I mean, recent experience for me was that I had specifically asked for a particular NIH study section to review my application, and my application was assigned to another study section. You don't have full control over who's going to review your application. But you could try as best as you can to focus your application so that it appeals to that study section. Now, two general comments I want to make is that for NIH, you in general, you want to write applications that appeal to a broader audience. Even if your application goes to BMRD, still, so there's quite a bit of diversity in the applications. Don't assume that everyone knows your research area, both scientific research area, but also the methodological research area. So write it in a way that convinces the reviewers that one, this is important, and I'll talk more about this, and two, sort of try to make sure that they would be able to follow your application. If your application is too technical, obviously NIH reviewers might get lost, given that it's a short application anyways. But even for NSF applications, you don't want to write applications that are too technical without necessarily introducing the background. So if you're writing an application that is like cutting edge research in a narrow area and does have a great potential, but if you're not laying out the foundations for that application, the reviewers will not be able to follow. So think about all of this as before you even start writing your application. Now, then the next set of items that I want to talk about is as you start thinking about writing your proposal. I think this is something that is often overlooked, that planning for your proposal is something that is really critical and important. Writing a successful proposal takes time. It's a pretty time-intensive process, especially if it's the first few proposals that you're writing. And it's not just the science of it. It's also all the administrative components of your proposal, putting together budget, figuring out human subject research, figuring out all the collaborators that you would be working with, getting all the documents ready for your proposal. Try to figure out how long it takes for your proposal. And depending on which agency you're writing to, this is different. But talk to people who have done this before and have had success, and get a sense of how long it takes. A lot of departments have people that have successfully written grants before. Try to get a few examples of successful grants from your colleagues and take a look at them. And not only take a look at the science, but also ask them what they did throughout that process of writing applications. So planning is important. If you're planning to submit to the MS program, the statistics program, the window is December 1st to December 15th. Make sure that at least the semester before that or the quarter before that you have time to write your proposal and plan ahead for writing. And I'll talk more about that planning once in a couple of bullet points, because you want to also allow time for receiving feedback. And I'll have more about this, but try to plan from the time of your submission. Give yourself like 2 weeks of buffer, and then plan back to see when you should start and when you should think about putting together your application. Now, a lot has been already said about writing a good proposal. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we're running out of time. But really, you need to make a clear case to that audience, for that audience, to be excited about your proposal. You need at least one of the reviewers of your proposal to be really excited about your proposal, and the others to at least not hate it or not be bothered by it. If you write your proposal in a way that it's difficult to read, reviewers, Joshua mentioned this, reviewing 8 to 10 applications in a short span and discussing them, if your reviewer gets bothered by notation or by font that you're using or by spacing, even little things, by sentences that are too long and too difficult to read, make things easy for your reviewer. The happier your reviewer is reading your proposal, the better would be the chance of your proposal succeeding. If you make it really difficult, I'm going to get tired. I'll lose my focus when I'm reviewing your proposal. So write it in a way that the reviewers will have an easy time reading it, and at least write it in a way that 1 or 2 people get really excited about the impact of your work or the innovation of your work. You need an advocate in that panel. It's very competitive. A lot of people who are writing good proposals, you need at least someone to advocate for your proposal, saying that I think this is really cool. If it happens, it'll do something important. And again, it's been said, write coherently and accurately, respect the literature, and there's tons of writing resources out there. Use them. There are really good courses out there, Coursera courses. There's a really fantastic one Stanford teaches on writing that is a good resource. Learn how to write in a way that is easy to read and effective communication. And I think I have the exact same thing. You had revise, Josh, and I have rewrite, rewrite, and rewrite, and rewrite again. This is, I can't emphasize this enough. I mean, I think I still sort of have my folders with my proposals that sort of, they go through 7, 8, 10 revisions. So that I have like the V1, V2, all the way to V10 before they're done. You have to do it. I mean, you're your own best critic. Write it, take a step back, and this is why the planning is important. You want to allow that time. Write it, take a step back, leave it alone for a week, then go read it again, and think about sort of critically what is missing. And of course, this is related to sort of my next comment, that is seek feedback. Find people in your department, outside of the department, both mentors and peers. This is really important. You guys could, I mean, especially for junior faculty, if you form peer mentoring groups, you could read each other's proposals in a way that sort of you figure out that is not going to make it difficult for you to comment on each other's proposals. But this requires that you start early. You allow that time for feedback. Your senior colleagues are going to be busy, and you're not going to have time to read your proposal once you do finish it 2 days before your deadline. You have to give them an appropriate time. And so build that time into your planning. Now, the last 2 comments are general comments, sort of after you've written your proposal. I think these have been mentioned already, but be persistent. Usually the first time doesn't work. Be resilient. This is a process that there is some randomness in it. It doesn't always work, but if you learn how to use the reviews, I mean, you shouldn't necessarily say that everything the reviewers are saying is correct, because sometimes they misunderstand what you're saying. Reviewers have a limited amount of time, but learn how to read the reviews in a way that helps you improve your proposals. And this is going to go a long way. And I'll mention, in terms of resilience, I recently served on an NSF panel. Judy knows this. And I went back and read reviews that I got for my own application that wasn't funded on that panel. And I was just so, there was one reviewer, there's always one reviewer that might not like your application. It's within people who are in biomedical sciences, it's called reviewer number 3. So the reviewer number 3 is always there to find something wrong with your application. That's really a lot of times all it takes, that your application might not get funded. But this is a process that you have to be persistent and resilient in it, and keep trying. It works eventually. But for it to work, also volunteer to review. I think my perspective to grant writing changed quite a bit after I started reviewing in panels, and I volunteered to review in panels, and I learned how the panels work and sort of what are the discussions. That's something that I can't recommend enough. Okay, I talked too much. I'll stop.
Thank you, Ali, for the excellent presentation and tips.
There's one question from the participants that I want to address live. So this is regarding my comment about submitting multiple proposals to the same program. So it is not necessarily regarded as a concern by the panel, but what we observed in the past is a single PI submitted 2 proposals to the same program in the same year, while each proposal was very thin. So if you can have substantial or new ideas that are very different from each other on different topics, or you're working with different collaborators, the co-PIs, that won't be a serious concern. But if you are junior or new PI who haven't received a grant before, and it might be better for you to consider, if those topics are relevant, related, it may be better to put together a stronger, a more compelling proposal, or single proposal, instead of a spread too thin. I also put in the chat window several links for new PIs, especially those from non-R1 institutions. There is a new program, very great opportunity for junior researchers to consider. So take a look at the NISS program from NSF. And I recently also participated in a webinar organized by ASA Committee on Funded Research. And also go to their website, you can find a recorded webinar about funding opportunities in NSF and NIH.
Thanks, Judy, for the response. And thanks to all the panelists and speakers, not only for the great presentations, but also answering many of the audience questions through the Q&A box. We have a couple minutes left. If anyone has any questions for the panelists, now would be a good time to put in the Q&A box. So I have a quick question. Sometimes you get reviews from the panel which are not very encouraging, and to the extent you wonder whether this idea will have any room, so that you want to do a resubmission, or you just want to drop this idea and start something new. How do you get a sense of that? How do you decide whether to push forward and work on the reviewers' comments or just drop the idea? What would be a good tips for all of the this is a question from the panelists here.
I mean, I could say with NIH, you can look for buzzwords. If it's kind of at the border, and you're getting, if your proposal is not scored at NIH, that's kind of an indication that it was in the lower half of the proposals that were submitted, and so that should be an indication that there were some problems that were identified. But if you do get scores, that's great news. That means you're already in the upper half. And so if you look at the reviewers' comments, and if they're using terms like these problems are fixable, so just judging by the comments from the reviewers, I mean, it's a decision that I always tell my junior colleagues, oh yes, if you're in the upper half and you get reviews and you're scored, that's a great start. Now it's time to start the revision process, and like you would revising a paper, I always tell my junior colleagues, really try to overwhelm the reviewers with great work and how you've worked hard to address their comments on a revised proposal when it's identified as such in the panel. Part of the discussion is set aside to address the question, how has the research team addressed the comments of the previous panel? And so if there's uniform consensus that yes, this revision has done a great job, and if they are able to resolve the major concerns of the previous panel, that's a great thing.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll quickly
That's
add.
also, go ahead, Ali. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, it's also where it's great to have a conversation with the program officer to get that clarity, really helpful. Because it may also be that you wrote a great proposal, even got a great score, but she has 8 proposals already funded in that area, and she doesn't need it in her portfolio. So it doesn't always equate. It often does equate, and as Joshua said, that halfway mark is a good way to know if you got a score. But it's really good to get that feedback. And
I totally agree with Steve. That we would, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to program directors after you carefully read the reviews. And for NSF, not only reviews, but also a panel summary will be generated that was approved by the entire panel. That would mention the major weaknesses and the strength of the proposal and the rationale for the panel to place the proposal in the recommended category or not recommended category. If it's in the recommended category, it doesn't guarantee to be funded, but it shows that the panel appreciated some components of the research project. At NISF, there is no revision. This is different from NIH. So we leave to the PS to make your own best judgment call how to incorporate a part of the review comments when you decide to resubmit the proposal.
Maybe the only thing I'll add, I was actually going to mention talking to the program officers. The only thing I'll add is that depends on where the issues are that have been identified. In addition to the comments, if the issues are about the approach or about sort of the method that you're proposing, those are usually fixable. You could go back to the same program and they're usually fixable. If the issues are about sort of innovation and significance, they're either sort of questioning what you're doing, which probably means that your research is not a good fit potentially for that program. So it might still, if you believe that this is really interesting research, it might be a better fit for another program. It might not be a good fit for NIH. Go see if NSF is interested. So try to rethink where the research needs to go.
Right. Thank you all. I think we are a couple minutes past our time.
Yep.
So a great round of applause for all our panelists.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
For the audience, please make
Seeing
sure to
everyone.
submit the evaluations. Thank you all. Bye-bye.